My story is probably not that unusual. I was born in Iowa. I'm an only child. My parents got divorced when I was 5. We moved around a lot. Um, uh, we started moving. I was born in Iowa, and then in 4th grade, we moved to Los Angeles. We lived there for a year. Then we moved to Chicago. We lived there for 3 years. Then we lived in Canada for a year and a half. And then after Canada, we moved back to Chicago and we were in 6 months. We were there for 6 months. And then my mom had actually already moved to Lexington, Kentucky. And I was just finishing out my sophomore year semester. And my grandma was staying with me. And I took a final on Wednesday. I had a half day. I came home and then I found out like there's a bunch of phone calls from family members. It's all very weird. And it turned out my dad died. And so my dad passed away on Wednesday. Friday, we went to Arizona for the funeral. Saturday or Thursday, we went to Arizona. Friday was the funeral. Saturday, we came home. And Sunday, I moved to Kentucky. And I started school on Tuesday. And I like super don't recommend like starting a new school when your dad just died. Like it's not an easy way to like make friends, but obviously it kind of stuck with me. And so I didn't actually start drinking until I was 19 and in college. Like everything in my family being from the Midwest was all about drinking. You're happy, you drink, you're sad, you drink, sports, you drink, you're hanging out with family, you drink, everything was about drinking. And so it's just totally normal. So in college, I went to a liberal arts college for a year, where it just seemed like everyone was drinking. It was just like totally normal to be drinking. And then kind of like my dad's death caught up to me and I was like diagnosed with bipolar, and I ended up going to University of Kentucky for a little bit. Not for a little bit, I ended up graduating from there. But when I hit college, that's when my drinking really kind of took off. And I think that just like it felt normal. It felt like that's what you just did. You're in college, you drink, great. You go to parties, you drink, you stay home, you drink. I learned that my superpower is turning anything into a drinking game, which I now use to try and keep people hydrated. But I remember in college, we would drink every day and we decided we wouldn't drink on Tuesdays because you can't drink every day, right? Then you have a problem. So I graduate from college and moved to Chicago after college. It takes me a little while. I eventually fail out of school and then go back and like earn my degree. And then I moved to Chicago and I start working at a big public accounting firm. And start traveling 100% for my job. At this point, like all you do in this job is drink, right? Like all social occasions are drinking. I swear anyone who works at a public accounting firm is either an alcoholic or a gambler. And it is what it is. I like start being really successful at my job because there's kind of like a culture of hanging out and drinking. And then if you could hang with the like important people, that's when the bonding really happened, like the late night shots, and then you're like best friends with the partners. And so I'm like pretty successful at this point. The big thing though is that you party hard, you work hard, and you party harder. But I'm traveling 100%. Drinking at the airport becomes my second favorite thing to do in the world. I love drinking at the airport. It's so fun. And there's a Hilton, I say at Hilton, I'm a Hilton Honors person, and I go to the Hilton Honors bar all the time. I make friends with the concierge. She still calls me on my birthday, even to this day. That's how much time I spent with her. And so eventually, after traveling 100% for 5 years, the company offers to move me to Los Angeles, where I'll only travel 50 to 60% of the time. And at this point, I'm like begging for it because I'm having to take vacation to just stay home for a week. You know what I mean? So I moved to Los Angeles, but that was like a terrible idea. I am bipolar, like I said, and I was unmedicated at this point for about 5 to 7 years. I have no support system, and then my alcoholism really just kind of gets out of control at this point. I start buying the big bottle of wine because the 750 milliliter of wine is not enough, and I don't want to open 2 bottles because that's too much, but a big bottle, that's fine. That's still just one bottle. I like start isolating. I have no support group. I drive everywhere in LA, and then all of a sudden, like in LA, Loveline was a thing. Remember Adam Carolla and Dr. Drew, terrible Dr. Drew. Anyway, one night I'm driving and he says, "You don't have a problem until it starts affecting your everyday life. Like you lose your job or you lose relationships." And I'm still employed and I still have my relationship. So in my head, this like sticks in my head that I'm like, oh, I don't have a problem, but I like am basically a functioning alcoholic at this point. And then I get medicated because it ends up being too much. I start having kind of like a mental breakdown because I'm just like drinking all the time and I'm so unhappy, and I'm bipolar. It's a chemical imbalance. It's a real, it's a thing. And so once I get medicated, I realize I hate LA and I don't want to stay out there. I stay in LA for 3 years total and then moved to Minnesota. Now I'm back in the Midwest. And if you've never been to Minnesota, like there's nothing else to do there but drink. It's so cold. And so like there's a joke in Kentucky that when it snows in Kentucky, the stores run out of bread and milk. But in Minnesota and Wisconsin, the joke is that you run out of the liquor store shelves are empty, right? And so I built this group of friends, and at this point, I think I'm just like a fun drunk. Like I don't have bad times when I'm drunk. I'm mostly just like get in the I love you stage. And again, I'm still employed. My relationships are thriving. So Dr. Drew says I don't have a problem. So I think I don't have a problem. But in Minnesota, it gets a little bit rough because I move into this neighborhood where the whole neighborhood just kind of hangs out at this one guy's house. His garage is like a man cave and we get super drunk and then you can just walk home. And so at this point, I'm like now getting blackout drunk on a pretty regular basis. And so that's not super great. And I'm like, also like during this whole time I'm smoking weed, right? Like I learned, like got into weed when I was in college and then just kind of like stuck with it because I loved being high. It was just like and it was natural, right? Like shouldn't be illegal. And so anyway, all this stuff is happening. And then I end up like getting an opportunity. I am doing really well at my job. I work at a major bank at this point, and I get a chance to move to Louisville, Kentucky, which is something that I've really wanted to do since I graduated from college. So I moved to Louisville, Kentucky. And then at this point, I'm drinking every day. I'm getting high every day. But I'm working from home. So like, there are no rules when you work from home. It feels like sometimes I would start drinking a little bit early and sometimes I would just like finish my glass of wine in the morning, it was fine. And then about 5 years ago, I start getting sick when I drink. I'm actually at a Jimmy Buffett concert at this point, and I was doing Jello shots and I get like physically ill, but not just like drunk throw up sick. I'm sick every half hour for 16 hours straight, just like constantly throwing up. And at this point, I'm like, oh, I just drink too much at Jimmy Buffett concerts. It won't happen again. And then it happens again. And this time it's not quite as much alcohol. It's a lot of sugary drinks though. So I think that's a problem. But in my head, I'm like, this doesn't feel normal. Like this is not normal sickness. So I go to the doctor and the doctor doesn't tell me, but I see him write in my notes that I'm a problem drinker. And in my head, I'm like, what does this guy know? Like this isn't like alcohol related, even though it's obviously only happening when I'm drinking. And so it happens sporadically, like every 6 months or so, but I continue drinking. This still isn't enough for me to stop drinking. And so I continue drinking and then I continue getting sick. And so finally I'm like, listen, maybe this is alcohol related, but he wouldn't take me seriously because he said it was alcohol related. And so I like had to prove to myself that it wasn't alcohol related. I get tested for like gallbladder stuff. But it does keep happening every time I've been drinking or had too much to drink. And so then I started the bargaining process, right? Like, well, I won't drink bourbon and maybe it won't happen. Or I'll only have 2 glasses of wine and it's never just 2 glasses of wine. And I start rolling the dice basically with it. And then finally I like get really sick. I keep getting sick. And finally, I'm like, listen, my body really is telling me that you can't drink anymore. You need to quit drinking. So I start like only drinking on the weekends, but really that ends up being I start drinking on Wednesday. right? And then like I never make it until the weekends. And then I try just hard seltzer and maybe just Miller Lite. And at, at some point, I'm just like, obviously something is wrong. My body is telling me that you cannot drink anymore and I cannot stop drinking. I finally get like violently ill and I'm spending a bunch of money on weed. And finally I call my therapist and I'm like, I just called her to ask her for better ways to reward myself because that's what I think is the problem, right? I think I have a good day and I want to reward myself with something. And I end up just I call her and I'm in tears and I'm like, I just need a better way to reward myself. And she said, what you need is an outpatient program. And I don't, she named the place at the Bourne Center and I didn't know what it was, but I was like, okay, I'll call, that's fine. And so I call and like filling out the form, I'm like, oh, I really am like drinking and smoking a lot. And I start to feel kind of like, oh, maybe I do have a problem. And they tell me it's going to be an 8-week program. And I was like, okay, here's what I'll do. I'll try and not drink for these 8 weeks. That would be the longest that I had ever gone without drinking. I will try this for the 8 weeks and then see, like reevaluate at that point if I want to stay sober, right? I'm like, let's just prove to myself that I can stop for 8 weeks and then we'll reevaluate. And then luckily through this program, there's education in group and I learn in education about the mental obsession and the phenomenon of craving. And they require you to go to 2 recovery meetings a week. And believe me when I say I tried to do anything but AA. I did a bunch of research. I was like really resistant to AA. But it ended up that there was no like other recovery meetings in Louisville twice a week. So I wouldn't be able to make that requirement. So I started going to AA meetings. And then I had an AA meeting where someone's like, oh, when you're sober, you kind of have to feel your feelings in a non-judgmental way. And that is the psychic change I needed. I was like, oh, the reason I'm using it is because I don't want to feel these feelings, right? I don't want to be uncomfortable. I don't want to feel bad. I had lumped everything into good feelings and bad feelings, and I never wanted to feel bad. And then I've learned through therapy that obviously like some of those quote unquote uncomfortable feelings that I thought were bad are actually quite productive and can help you kind of improve. But I just like, I was so just like, no, I didn't want to feel uncomfortable. So that's why I was using. And once I kind of pinpointed that, it kind of helped me like be open to maybe I really do have a problem. And so I started going to meetings and really paying attention. I really got a lot out of the group and I learned about shame and guilt and the difference between shame and guilt and how guilt can sometimes be productive and shame never is productive. And I start realizing that like I had this shame monster and she sounds exactly like my mom and she just like makes me feel bad about everything I do. And so I hear someone say, you know, if you wouldn't say it to your best friend, don't say it to yourself. And it just like something clicks to me. And I was like, oh, I'm being really mean to myself. And so I get sober. I survived the 8-week program and I decided I want to stay sober because I like the way I feel. I definitely had a pink cloud for a really long time. And I'm so thankful I did. But like things, I celebrated 6 weeks or 6 months on Wednesday last week. And it's been amazing. I'm almost through all 12 steps and the promises are coming true. I really I like the way I feel. I like the way I like myself better. And part of it is because I don't have this constant guilt of knowing that I was lying to everyone, and it's amazing. And honestly, I've tried a bunch of self-help things, right? I've tried bullet journaling, I've tried all that kind of stuff, and nothing has worked better than just taking it one day at a time. If I take it in smaller chunks, I used to try and do, well, I won't do something for 30 days and it never lasted, right? But just not doing something for one day. And then every day you just decide to not do something again for that day. Those days add up. And I'm 6 months later, 6 months ago, 6 months felt impossible. And I'm so happy I'm here and I would recommend it to anyone. And yeah, I guess that's my story. I'm BJ, I'm an alcoholic. Thank you so much.